All right, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in today. It is a gorgeous day here in Greensboro, North Carolina, and I'm just so pleased that you've come and joined me for this discussion. My name is Kevin Dorman. I use they, them, theirs pronouns, and I am the speech-language pathologist and owner here at Prismatic Speech Services. And today I am here to talk to you about one of my favorite topics in the world, which is transgender vocal training. This is my specialty. It is my passion. It's what I enjoy the most. And through my business, Prismatic Speech Services, I have been able to serve the transgender and non-binary populations of North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia as well. And just recently, I have spread my licensure to Georgia as well. And I thought, I could just send out a mass email discussing my services and what I do here, the kind of work that we do. But I thought it would be much more fun to try out a live video and see how that goes. And as you can see, it's been a little bit rough already, but we're going to do our best to just power on through it and still make it a fantastic time. So like I said, we are just now licensed in Georgia, and we have updates such as this rolling out all the time. The best way to stay up to date with the latest and greatest news from Prismatic Speech Services is to subscribe to Refractions, which is our newsletter. And you can subscribe to that at prismaticspeech.com/refractions. We'll be mailing out information about free resources that we create, future live chats, because I definitely want to come back to this once the rust has been shaken off. Licensing updates as we spread our reach to more and more states and other territories, as well as other future announcements and projects that we've got cooking, but we're not really ready to announce just yet. But we have a lot of exciting things planned for 2019. So please consider subscribing if you are interested. So, as I said, today we are here to talk about transgender vocal training and answer some basic questions that some of you may have about transgender vocal training. We've received several questions from audience members who were interested in attending. So if you have any questions that you would like me to answer, please don't hesitate to put them in the live chat comments, as well as submitting them at prismaticspeech.com/live. We'll be monitoring both those channels for hot questions coming in. So the first thing that I want to answer about transgender vocal training is, what exactly is transgender vocal training? There's a lot of different information out there in the community, and different clinicians and different voice professionals approach this work with different perspectives. So keep that in mind. The things that I say here today will not hold true for all clinicians that do this work. This is simply how I approach this work. So if you encounter discrepancies with other clinicians, there's not really too much that I can do about that. So the way that we approach transgender vocal training is we make it a client-centered process in which the clinician guides that client in the exploration of their voice and their communication habits using vocally hygienic methods. And this is something that I really want to stress here at the outset of this conversation. Because no matter where you are producing your voice, it is going to involve a certain amount of tension. We use tension in order to produce voice. What we want to make sure that we do when we start moving someone's voice to other parts of their voice that don't occur as naturally to them, we want to make sure that they're not producing that voice with too much tension. Because if you use too much tension, that's where you get into dangerous territory and could potentially harm yourself. So everything we do here is vocally hygienic, and the ultimate goal of this work is to increase a client's quality of life by exploring their voice and their communication. It's very customizable to an individual client's wants and needs, their previous experience with their voice, what parts of their voice that they feel empowered as well as disempowered by. And it's not our job to tell a person how to act or how to behave, right? This is ultimately what we're trying to do here, is align that client's voice with their sense of self. Get those a little bit more in line so that that client doesn't feel as restricted when using their voice. Because a lot of people, I feel like the voice is one of the main ways that we advocate for ourselves, right? It's how we raise opinions in our social lives. It's how we socialize with other folks. It's how we raise our opinions at our jobs. And if you're uncomfortable with your voice or you feel disempowered by it, then that results in your voice being lost in all those different places. And that's no good. So we want to help our clients raise their voices and feel empowered to share their opinions across all aspects of their lives. Let's see here. So transgender vocal training is it's accessible for all clients, all ages, all genders, all presentations. Basically, if you feel like your voice isn't performing as best as it could, or you feel embarrassed by it, or you simply want to explore what else your voice is capable of producing, then transgender vocal training is absolutely right for you. Trans feminine clients are that's the population that I find myself working with the most, but I also work with trans masculine clients as well as non-binary clients as well. Really, no matter who you are, no matter your gender, no matter where you're starting from, if you're unhappy with your voice, there's no reason for that. So if you're curious, then let's go ahead and work together and try and explore some different methods of producing voice. There are a lot of different domains here that we can target during this work. And again, it all comes down to what that individual client is uncomfortable with. Pitch is a big one for most of the clients that I work with, which simply refers to how high or how low one's voice is on average. There's also intonation, which refers to how volume and pitch may change during a sentence or an utterance of any length. There is resonance, which is my favorite to talk about, which is how the sound one produces is changed by the size and shape of one's resonating chambers, like their mouth or their nose. There is articulation, which refers to the length, the intensity, and shape of the vowels and consonants that one produces. There's also language, which refers to context-based word choice. So, depending on who you're talking to, depending on what context you are operating in, if you're at your job or you're at your friend's house or you're talking to a police officer, these require different parts of your personality to be surfaced or to be concealed, right? Depending on how safe you feel in that environment. And so we want to make sure that the language choice that you're using is appropriate and empowering for you. Again, I'm not so interested in matching gender norms or marking off check boxes on a checklist. Say, oh yeah, this is masculine, this is masculine, this is masculine. Here you go, you're discharged. It really matters to me what kind of person they see themselves as. So we look at word choice, at sentence structure, speaking style. There is research that suggests that women tend to use these words and these sentence structures more often, and men tend to use these sentences and these words more often. And I personally don't put a lot of stake into this. I think word choice and personality and sentence structure and all these things are a lot deeper than the research suggests. And not everyone is trying to communicate the same idea of masculinity or femininity. So we really want to talk to our clients and counsel them and figure out who exactly they are and what they want to communicate with their voice. What do they feel is not performing well enough for them in terms of their voice and communication? I'm getting a little sidetracked, so I'm going to jump right back on track here. Nonverbals is the last domain that we can work on, and this is a broad domain. This refers to many different things, such as sitting posture, standing posture, walking gait, facial expression, eye contact, and many others that are not coming to me right now. Even scent is in nonverbals. And again, this is an area that is heavily informed by the cultures that we move through. Different people with different cultural backgrounds may have different norms for all of these different domains, honestly, but especially language and nonverbals. So it's very important that we don't just say, oh, well, this is how you move like a woman. This is how you move like a man. That's absurd, for one thing. And it's absolutely not true for many of the clients that we work with. So I'd like to go into each of these domains just a little bit more thoroughly. Let's start with pitch, and then we'll move on to intonation and resonance, the big three. And then we'll talk a little bit about articulation, language, and nonverbals very soon. But before we move into discussing these, I want to play a couple clips of some clients that I have discharged who have given me permission to use their voice clips, both on my website and in any marketing materials that I create. So let's take a listen to these and see what you hear. This first sample is a composite of 3 different recordings. The first being this client before we started working together. The second is the voice that they like the most, the one that they feel the most empowered by. And the last clip is sort of an extreme of their like feminine presenting voice that they put on because it was fun. We were having a good time that day. Let's take a listen, see what we hear.
I'm keeping a running list of facts, findings, feelings that I've come across in my transition. After 6 months, I started feeling a little better about this whole thing, gained a little perspective on the process. Here are the things so far I wish I could share with myself of the not-too-distant past. I know a lot of this is subjective and personal experience, but I'm hoping maybe this can help others just starting out. Please add to this list in comments if you've got anything.
Cool. So that's one client. This next clip is from a client on our discharge session. We don't have a clip from when we first started working together, but I just think her voice is fabulous. So please take a listen to this one as well.
When the sunlight strikes raindrops in the air, they act as a prism and form a rainbow. The rainbow is a division of white light into many beautiful colors. These take the shape of a long, round arc with its path high above and its 2 ends apparently beyond the horizon.
I'm getting a message that the audio that we just played is doubling, so that's not great, and I apologize for that. That's a little kink that we'll have to work out in the future. But for now, if you want to listen to those clips, go to prismaticspeech.com/TVT, and all of those clips that I just played are on there as well. So pitch. Obviously, for folks who are a little bit more trans-feminine leaning, they may look at increasing pitch. For folks who are trans-masculine or think that their voice is too high, we can look at decreasing pitch. Let's see. The research says that voices higher than 160 hertz are more reliably rated as feminine, and voices lower than 160 hertz are more reliably rated as masculine. Here's 156 hertz. Hopefully this won't blow your speakers out of the water. Okay, so that's right about here. So the research says that voices speaking higher than 160 on average, like my voice is right now, is more typically reliably rated as feminine, whereas voices lower than this are more reliably rated as masculine. Now, there's a lot more that goes into language than simply pitch. So we are going to move on and talk about intonation. Intonation, as I mentioned before, is how volume and pitch change along a sentence or utterance of any length. Research says that a more masculine perceived way of intoning is to have much less pitch variance and to emphasize words using volume instead of pitch. So right now I'm trying to keep my pitch a little bit more steady as I talk and use volume to emphasize words. Whereas apparently a more feminine perceived way to intone is to have greater pitch differences, to use those pitch differences to emphasize words. And again, these are all just general ideas of where to start this work, right? We can't just, I don't think that aligning someone's vocal presentation to all of these hallmarks of like feminine perceived speech and all these hallmarks of transmasculine or masculine perceived speech is useful. Our work has to be more nuanced than that. And so these are just ideas of where to get started with this work. Now let's talk about resonance, although I'm going to take a quick drink of water before we do that. Hang on just a sec. Delicious. I would be a horrible SLP if I didn't model drinking water while talking so much. So, resonance refers to how the sound generated down here in the throat is shaped by the size and shape of your mouth, your oral cavity, and your nasal cavity, your nose, as well as your sinuses, these cavities sort of around the eyes and the nose that voice tends to resonate in, to vibrate in. But for our intents and purposes, we can't really change those cavities. So let's talk about the oral cavity instead. So again, and I think referring to violins and cellos is pretty useful when talking about resonance, because these are two instruments that, for all intents and purposes, are shaped the same, but they have very different qualities to their sound, right? If you think of a violin, I think of these like bright, piercing notes. And when I think of a cello, I think of warm, rich, deep, dark tones as well. And the reason for that is because of the size of these resonating chambers, as well as the shape. The cello is a much bigger resonating chamber. It's a much bigger instrument overall, and the violin is much smaller. And thus, the resonance that's produced is affected as well. So for transmasculine folks, we look at sort of increasing the size of the oral cavity. Just by simple relaxation techniques, trying to lower the tongue down, trying to get a darker, richer sound to that voice. And for transfeminine folks, we look at lightening up the resonance, bringing it more forward towards the front of the face to thin out the voice and give it some more of those bright tones overall. And I've been trying, as I'm demonstrating this, to keep my pitch consistent while moving resonance around, which is pretty tricky. And we received a question related to this as well. Hopefully we'll have time for that. Ooh, 6 minutes left. Got to get going. Here is a quick video demonstration of me shifting around pitch and resonance. This video is on YouTube if you ever want to watch it in isolation. Let's check it out really quickly. Not to toot my own horn. Oh, will this duplicate the sound as well? Probably. Oh, well. We'll play it. We'll see what happens. It's only 30 seconds long.
When the sunlight strikes raindrops in the air, they act as a prism and form a rainbow.
The rainbow is a division of white light into many beautiful colors. These take the shape of a long, round arch with its path high above and its two ends apparently beyond the horizon. There is, according to legend, a boiling pot of gold at one end. People look, but no one ever finds it. When a man looks for something beyond his reach, his friends say he is looking for the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Cool. So hopefully that didn't just sound like garbage to y'all. That's something that we'll have to figure out together. But again, you can find that on YouTube or on prismaticspeech.com/TVT. Let's see. So I was going to talk to, oh, sorry, I got a message that I just got completely distracted by. That's not good for producing live content. So that video that you hopefully just heard, I hear that it was a little bit quiet, and that's what I got distracted by. That was me shifting pitch and intonation and resonance all together. It's much easier to shift all of these things as related concepts, but perhaps a good way to explore your own voice's capabilities and what your voice sounds like with these different mixes is to try and go to these different corners of your voice in terms of pitch and in terms of resonance. Let me make myself a little bit fuller screen here. There we go. Hello. Hi again. So if your voice is a little bit on the lower side, like mine is, maybe try and shift your resonance forward. See how that sounds. What kind of quality does this voice have? It's sort of like borderline nasal, right? If I wanted to, I could go for that nasal voice, but but most of the clients that I work with are not looking for like this type of voice. I don't think this is really desirable.
You can also try and shift resonance back at this lower pitch as well. See what that feels like.
And then try the opposite. Go higher in pitch. Go higher in pitch
And try and shift resonance back. Oh, this is a good voice. This is This is kind of an absurd voice. It's kind of like a Julia Child's voice, isn't it? Oh, yes.
And you can try and keep pitch higher while also shifting resonance forward as well, and see what that does to your voice.
And so by exploring your voice's capabilities and its qualities in this sort of formulaic way, that's how we decide where a client's voice should be moved to. It's not like, oh, you should raise your voice to this specific hertz rating on average, or I think you should move your resonance to this place. It's much more about, let's try these things out. And then let's think about how it felt as you produced that quality of voice. You know, did that forward resonance feel good? Did it feel better at that higher pitch or a midline pitch or lower pitch? I don't know. You'll have to tell me as my client. Let's see. Articulation, like I said, there's not really too much to talk about here. The research says that a more feminine perceived way of producing vowels is to extend them out. So to hold them out just a little bit longer and to have precise articulation. Precise, but not like super pressurized, right? So you can hear right now I am articulating fairly precisely, but it is not produced with like a lot of energy, right? Not a lot of like explosive energy on those consonants. That's really hard to do. And so, you know, this is what the research says, but again, I don't really put too much stake in that. It's much more about a client and where they want to move their voice. We also talked about language and nonverbals. Seeing as we're short on time, I think I'm going to skip right past these. The biggest thing that I suggest for clients who want to play with language and nonverbals is to observe speakers around them, right? Just people watch at a mall or a library or a park or some other place where people gather, and take a look at how different people move through these public spaces, how they interact with the people around them. You can find out a lot of information about a person just by observing them and seeing how they move through a space. One of my favorite examples is if you see a smaller person walking down the street who has a hoodie on, who has earbuds in, and who has their hoodie drawn up, cinched tight, and if they're looking at their screen as they walk and they're walking pretty fast down the street, that communicates to me that that person does not want to be communicated with. And so just observing people and trying to find out little unique things about them based on these observations can be really useful. And then if you see something that someone does, like a certain way that they sit that you notice, oh, that's interesting, try it out. Just go ahead and try out sitting in that different way or moving differently, or speaking in a slightly different way. You're not going to hurt yourself by playing around with nonverbals or language. And I like to save people money where I can, honestly. So a lot of this work can be done independently without a speech therapist's help. Let's see, what else is there to talk about? So we are at time. I'm going to try and answer a couple questions before we end here, because I know we got started late as well. While I'm pulling up these questions, one more time, consider subscribing to Refractions as I pull this up. We're going to be hosting a lot more events throughout 2019, hopefully with a little bit more panache than this one, but I honestly think we did pretty well on this first live question or live session, hopefully. All right, so we have an audience question here from Kim, who says, let me make sure. Oh, yep, nope, this is covering my face. Let me shrink this on down. Let me shrink this down too. Doesn't need to be quite as big. There we go. All right, so Kim says, I'm a type A personality who is self-taught and am perfectly happy with my voice. I'm generally relaxed as far as other people are concerned, but usually highly critical of myself because I know my voice is okay. The only issue I have is one of overcoming the fear of failure in public, so much so that I'm seriously considering laryngoplasty surgery. Does your training or coaching address this kind of problem? And the answer, Kim, of course, is absolutely we do. And this is a problem that a lot of my clients encounter as they begin bringing their voice into other places. For a lot of our work together, we
simply practice in this little safe space that we have here, because experimenting with voice can be a very vulnerable thing for a lot of people. So we practice a lot in here, but if you can't transfer those skills to your job or your social life, then how useful are these skills to practice, right? So we call that generalization, and generalization is incredibly important for this work. One thing that you can try, Kim, is you can write down several phrases that you use. Let's see, you mentioned fear of failure in public. So think about the public situations that you get into, right? Socializing with friends while out at dinner or at your job. And think about different phrases that you tend to use in these places. And then practice those phrases a bunch. Practice them a bunch until you're sick of them. And these little practice phrases that you have practiced to the point of being sick ad nauseum, they can serve as anchor points for you as you use your voice in this more public setting. So that hopefully can help. Kim, if you want more information, please feel free to email me, kevin@prismaticspeech.com. We also have a question here from Madison, who says, why is it that when I try to talk in my head voice, it sounds higher? Like just trying to talk in head voice causes my pitch to go up. I can't seem to talk in head voice while only marginally raising my pitch. If I try to talk in head voice, I may as well just be raising pitch because they're the same thing to me. Madison, thank you so much for your question. Again, this is a very common problem. Pitch and resonance are very closely intertwined, and for the vast majority of voice users, we don't bother trying to untangle these concepts. And so I think the exercise that I outlined earlier, going to the lower pitch and back resonance, lower pitch and forward resonance, higher pitch and forward resonance, and higher pitch and back resonance, can be really helpful. Just playing around and experimenting with your voice, right? A more fun and less structured way you could go about this is just to try and imitate speakers around you, right? Cartoon characters from any cartoons that you might watch. That's a great place to hear over-exaggerated voices with really different qualities. Steven Universe is great for this, but like literally any cartoon can pretty much serve you fine. Just try and get more flexibility out of your voice, Madison. Raise your awareness. Try and go about it with this more structured view, but I completely understand if it's a little bit dry to approach your voice with this method. Let's see. One last question we have here is from a speech language pathology student who wished to remain anonymous, who said, most of the transgender vocal training materials I've found only discuss training for trans women or assigned male at birth people seeking a more feminine sounding voice. What resources are there for learning to provide therapy to trans men and assigned female at birth, non-binary people seeking voice masculinization, either in the absence of testosterone or if the voice changes from testosterone were not satisfactory? And Anon, I'm so glad that you sent in this question because I feel like in the trans masculine community, I feel like there's not a lot of outreach from the speech language pathology side in the transmasculine community. And that needs to change because there are a lot of transmasculine folks or people who were assigned female at birth folks who are walking around with these voices that are slightly lowered because of testosterone, or, you know, it lowered it some, but what it really did was decrease the amount of higher pitches that they can access comfortably. And saying, well, this is my voice. This is what I'm resigned to. This is how my voice has changed due to testosterone, and there is no hope for me. So I guess I'm just kind of resigned to this voice forever. And that is awful and absolutely not true. Because resonance is something that we can change there, and intonation and articulation. And we can even see if we can access some lower pitches in a more vocally hygienic way. Because maybe it's just the way that that person is pursuing this lower pitch that is limiting how low their voice can go. Which is a complex concept that we absolutely do not have time to unravel right now. So to answer your question more specifically, Anon, there aren't that many resources out there Unfortunately, if you are a clinician, I would personally recommend voice and communication therapy for the transgender and gender diverse clients, a comprehensive clinical guide. And this is the third edition put out by Dr. Richard Adler, Sandy Hirsch, and Jack Pickering. Thank you, you three, for your tireless work in producing these resources for us. If you are a average voice user, this book is probably a little bit too technical, but no one is stopping you. So please feel free to check it out if you are interested. But that is a great resource for transmasculine voice. They've added a lot more in this most recent edition that wasn't there in the previous edition. So check it out. And with that, I do believe that we are going to wrap up our live session for today. Thank you all so much for coming out and joining me. This was a new experience for me, and it was a little bit rough in a couple of places. So sorry for the folks that were trying to join in on YouTube. You can't really account for everything, can you? So again, one last call to action. Please consider joining Refractions. That is my newsletter. And if you are interested in receiving these services, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I offer free consultations, 30 minutes, and my services are now available in North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, and Georgia. So once again, thank you all so much for joining me, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.